good morning, and good afternoon to in-house counsel and in-house legal professionals from all across North America and the world. Welcome to In-House Connect. My name is Shai Mahani. I'm the CEO and co-founder of In-House Connect. I'm thrilled to have you here with us today. Thank you for spending your breakfast time or your lunch time with us, or your dinner time in Garrick's case with us. And special thanks to our wonderful sponsor, Summize, and our fantastic presenters featuring Leah Samia, Garrick Archer, and Tom Pratt, who are going to talk about CLM best practices for in-house legal teams. And we're going to learn how Ikon Science leverages CLM software to dramatically expedite and enhance commercial contract workflow. This is our 99th event of the year, Wayne Gretzky 99. So I'm wondering, are you here for the first time, or have you tuned into an IHC webinar before? We have a wonderful panel featuring Garrick Archer, who is the general counsel at Ikon Science. Garrick has over 25 years of legal experience. Originally a private practice lawyer, he transitioned to in-house roles throughout his tenure for companies such as Jewel, Blue Prism, and now Ikon Science. As Ikon Science's GC, his skills lie in contract negotiation, governance, privacy, and risk management. Garrick is joined by his colleague, Leah Samia, who is the VP of Sales Operations at Ikon Science. She is a management leader with a record of developing effective teams and partnering with executive leaders to achieve corporate goals. As VP of Sales at Ikon Science, she leads the way to best-in-class forecasting, compensation plan design, territory plannings, and reduction in attrition. She also has over 20 years of experience within operations roles, from financial analyst to business operations and now sales operations. And of course, last but not least, our moderator is Tom Pratt, who is the legal counsel and a pre-sales consultant at Summize. He has experience both in the legal and tech sectors. He previously worked in private practice, and he has deep understanding of complex legal frameworks, and his expertise in CLM stems from his previous involvement in negotiating contracts and using CLM software to manage agreements. He works closely with Summize's business development teams, helping them connect prospects to Summize's tailored CLM solution. It's wonderful to have Garrick, Leah, and Tom with us today. So Tom, without further ado, I'll turn things over to you to get us started.
Yeah, cheers, Shai. Thank you for having us. I'm excited to be obviously on number 99 of the webinars this year. Shame we couldn't be 100, but really excited for this today. Great also, just to call out, looking at the poll results here, great to have some repeat attendees over here with IHC and also some new attendees as well, too. Just in terms of an agenda for today. So as Shai mentioned, we'll do a little bit of an intro and look at really what contract lifecycle management software is, because I know obviously not everyone on the call will be familiar with the software and its capabilities. We'll then run over a little bit of the context behind this webinar and start to understand the challenges for both legal and sales in using obviously the contracting process. And then we'll take a deeper dive with Ikon Science themselves, my wonderful co-hosts Garrick and Leah, and then start to look at their CLM implementation journey with Summize and any tips and tricks that they may have for you all over here as well. Finally, we'll wrap up with some questions. As Shai mentioned, please do just populate your questions into the chat and we'll cover them over at the end. So really just to take a little bit of a deeper dive into contract lifecycle management and what it is. It's a piece of software that effectively enables you to manage the whole contracting process within your company. So whether that's starting with drafting, either from a commercial perspective or the legal team, CLM can assist with that. And then equally looking at then managing that workload from, again, both a commercial and a legal perspective, as we'll get into today. So that could be third-party contract reviews coming into the business, assisting with the turnaround time, reviewing those and getting them back out to the other side. But equally then tracking, once those contracts have been signed, the obligations under them. So extracting calendar dates and also key contractual terms too. Over at Summize, we take a really integrated approach to this CLM solution. So working in existing tools that you're really familiar and that your business is familiar with too. And we can again cover some of that later on today. So it'll be great to focus on the challenges, but also the impact that CLM can have obviously on your business as well, because again, there's a lot of functionality and capabilities, but tying that back to real world impact and value is obviously key. So just to begin with, I think it'd be useful to get a bit of a lay of the land to the challenges that you over at Ikon were facing before you started to bring on CLM. And to do that, we'll also have a look and interact with our audience and see what challenges they may be facing too. So it'd be great. Obviously, Shai's going to pop in another poll in the chat, and we can have a look at whether you and your team and sales teams are facing any bottlenecks at the moment in your contracting processes. So keep an eye out for that poll over in the chat. So Leah, I think it'd be great just to begin with yourself. What challenges were you facing initially in the contracting process, obviously from the commercial and sales teams, and how obviously were you looking to address them with the CLM?
Yeah, we were very manual, and we spent a lot of time trying to come up with ways to track where the contracts were at in the process from the sales side as well as from the legal side. We were old school, using an Excel file where people would log their legal request and it would get picked up by Garrick, and then he would log it back into the Excel. It was an additional manual process. We had several different versions of our legal documents floating around, one with a brand on them, one that had legal terms that were no longer approved or valuable. And so a lot of times we would, in the order management process, see contracts that hadn't even been to legal for review, had wrong names on them, all kinds of it was very chaotic. And it was constant, I guess there was constantly a complaint that legal wasn't working fast enough, right? There was constantly, when are we going to get this back from legal? I don't know where this is at in the legal cycle. That was the biggest challenge. And I think that's probably what really drove us, was sales complaining a lot, and also the visibility into being able to see where the contracts were at and within the legal cycle, where they were at within the sales cycle.
Yeah, that's great context. Thanks, Leah. I think there's a few challenges you've mentioned there that are particularly interesting. Obviously, everyone associates lack of automation with CLM, and obviously there can be improvements there. But I think one piece that you've mentioned in terms of transparency, that's obviously something that may not always be considered when introducing a CLM solution. But again, as you mentioned, I think it's one of those pieces that can perhaps have the greatest impact as well. What would you say, obviously, at the state of play before you introduced a CLM solution, what problems was that lack of transparency providing for the sales team?
It was causing a lot of finger pointing, right? It was the blame game, and a lot of that blame game fell on legal. Legal's not getting to it fast enough. Legal hasn't responded, and it became, even with forecasting, as we're going through our forecast, it became, if something wasn't happening for sales the way that management wanted it to come in or whatever, first thing they would go to is, it's been with legal for over a week. Yeah. And this allowed us the ability to tie a standard practice around how many days it would take legal, what status things were in. It gave that level of transparency to sales as well as leadership, as well as the legal counsel, so that we're all on the same page now as to exactly what's in the queue, exactly what the priorities are. And it minimizes that finger pointing.
Yeah, and I guess, Garrett, for you, obviously, understanding, again, the sort of pre-CLM world that you're in with Ikon, and as Leah's mentioned, that sort of blame game, finger pointing that was going on with forecasting and understanding where contracts were at. What was the impact of that, I'd say, on your day-to-day and obviously working with Ikon?
Obviously, you didn't want to be the person that was blamed on a sales call when you're not on there, and then they come, you say, oh, what about this? And you can point out that perhaps you weren't sent it a week ago, you're only sent it that day. It's interesting, when I joined Ikon, I was the 4th general counsel in 4 years, and that was 4 years ago. Each of them had a different way in which they would operate, what they found important in clauses personally, how they dealt with sales, where they even stored documents. They were all different. What we found, we needed to find a way that actually enabled us to, one, to create documents easily, to track the process of contractual requests when there was negotiations or reviews, and also then storage, to make sure we had a centralized repository of contracts. And that's why the CLM really, for me, was excellent for those sort of 3 aspects.
Yeah, and again, coming back to that point about a lot of maybe staff turnover, different processes going on, that brings me back to Leah's point about perhaps chaotic processes that were starting off in the contracting process and obviously managing that. I think it'd be useful as well to begin with to understand a little bit about, obviously, your sales cycle at Ikon where almost that deal and sales enablement piece also came in with Summize?
Yeah, I mean, our sales cycle, it can be quite lengthy just due to the nature of the products that we sell. Because we were in the software business, it's one of those things where it's very typical to have a 6 to 9 month sales cycle. The one thing that this really helped with was giving us standardized templates, right? So not having sales using all of the different templates, we know they now have one place to go to grab the paperwork that they need. They know it's the latest, greatest. They know that it's been reviewed by Garrick. It cuts down on a lot of the back and forth, right? Because if they don't have any red lines, they can just go put that contract in front of the client. They don't need to have legal involved unless the client comes back and makes changes. So it sped up a lot of that so that it wasn't as last minute, because they have access to everything. They can find everything. They have access to Garrick. There's the chat function within Summize, right? I think it's helped build more trust between the teams. Would you say that's true, Garrick?
Yeah, I think it helps in the governance as well, just generally, that say the chat function. But I see whenever someone creates a document, I get a notification they've created an NDA, but I don't have to review it because I know they're using the standard document, and they know as well. So if they're using the standard document, I only have to review it if there's actually an amendment by the other side. Otherwise, I know they're using the latest version.
And I guess going towards that sort of standardization of processes and templates, again, in that pre-CLM world, what was the impact of obviously dealing with all those sort of high volume but almost low value requests that require all that time?
It took up a lot of your day. Someone would get a non-disclosure agreement that they had on their computer from 2 years ago and say, can I use this one? Or they've even sent it to the client. And then you go, this is now approved form. So there was a lot of additional work that wasn't really contributing anything.
Yeah.
And a proper CLM helped us.
That's great. And in terms of obviously now talking about that trust piece as well, and obviously the relationship now between legal and sales, how is that collaboration element obviously help with that?
You can see when someone has lodged something. They can see when I've looked at it. They can see if I've asked them a question, because that won't be in an email. It'll actually be within Summize where I've asked them or queried about it. And anyone else, CEO, can go in and see where every particular deal is in the negotiation cycle and if there are any issues.
Yeah. And again, I guess to a point that you made earlier as well, Garrick, about those forecasting conversations, the sales conversations that legal aren't always a part of. I think, again, that transparency element, as you mentioned, anyone from management can go see those requests and see, okay, this is when it came in, this is the back and forth, the audit trail on it, this is who's approved it, and almost track that sales cycle, even from a request perspective as well.
That's good.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty much eliminated that excuse from the sales forecast, because they know that we can see that. And so they have other excuses now, but legal is not one of them.
And Leah, that's a great point from a commercial perspective as well. Obviously, as you've mentioned, with those forecasts now, it's a lot less finger pointing at legal and more almost introspect on your own sales approaches. And how have you found that change as an organization?
Yes, that definitely has changed, because it's forcing them to be more transparent in what they're discussing on the forecast calls. And also it's driven sales management when we are addressing concerns within the forecast. It's no longer about contracts. It's no longer, it very rarely comes up. Commercial terms might come up, but as far as the legal terms and conditions, that's almost non-existent now.
Yeah, that sounds like a complete night and day shift almost as well. And
it
Garrick,
is, yeah.
I'm sure you're employee number one now at Ikon.
But I don't know about that.
But no, that's been really great background. Thank you both. Just to move forward now to also look at your implementation journey with Summize. Just before you even selected a CLM vendor, how did you go about that process, going to market, starting to look at different solutions? Where did you begin there?
I'm actually going to defer that one to Garrick, because Garrick is the one who brought it to me to then look into after he narrowed it down. Garrick, I'll turn that one over to you.
Yeah, I looked at many things what functionality was there, ease of use, integration, and finally, obviously, cost comes into it as well. So I worked with our CFO, and ultimately we'd selected 2 vendors, one, of course, being Summize, and then Leah and the CFO did a deep dive into Summize, and then we proceeded from there. It was really quite an easy decision, I think. We were quite impressed with Summize.
And in terms of the factors and the criteria that you were looking at going to market, what would you say the key functionality was for Ikon? Was it integrations? Was it, again, those almost sales enablement pieces?
Yeah, I think it was the creation piece, the queue, if you like, the legal queue or the dashboard where you can see all the requests, and the repository and the searching of the repository. We recently had to do one of those, the various keywords. So those were the sort of the 3 things. The sort of governance piece is really the middle bit, the storage piece and the creation piece to automate a lot of the creation of documents.
And then Leah, come to you over with the sales team as well. What integrations are they currently using? How do they go and draft those contracts and submit contracts into legal as well?
Yeah, so we initially, touching really on the implementation piece, that from my perspective, because I'm responsible for all of the sales applications, my biggest concern was how complicated is this implementation going to be? How much work is it going to be to maintain? Is sales going to be willing to adopt it, right? If you have to click too many buttons or they ask you too many questions, sales is not going to do it. They just don't have they don't do that, right? They don't have the attention span for it. Making sure that it was very simple and easy to use and easy to implement. With Summize, it implements with Microsoft products, Microsoft Word, Microsoft Outlook, Teams. They have integrations with other, we just happen to be a Microsoft shop, so I can really only speak to those, but also the integration with Salesforce. When we first started the journey with Summize, they were still working through some of that, and being able to be a part of that journey with Summize was good. It's always good to know when it can be incorporated directly into your CRM as well, to give sales a one-stop place where they go for everything. I think from that aspect, Summize really, the implementation was very easy. It was very smooth, and the maintenance of it is very easy as well. We just recently had a request with something that we didn't have set up. I got it yesterday. I was able to get it done, and Garrick was able to start working it this morning. So being able to have that flexibility and have the ability to turn something around that quickly is game-changing.
That's great to hear, obviously, about almost that ease of implementation as well, because I know that is a really daunting factor for a lot of businesses when looking at bringing on CLM software. Obviously, it requires time, planning, resource, and again, when teams such as yourselves are so busy as well, it can be really daunting. I think it would be useful, again, to hear from our audience with another poll. So Shai's going to pop in another question, mainly about you and your experience with CLM. So are you currently working with a CLM? Are you looking at bringing CLM on board? Have you gone through implementations before? Have a look at our poll and provide your responses.
And Tom, we have 2 great questions in the chat. One is from Harrison. How did you build excitement or momentum for the product during implementation with your sales and business users?
Yeah, given how clunky everything was, the fact that when we started doing implementation, I brought in what I would call our sales influencers. Some of the people that work in sales have a large impact on the mindset of others around them, of their peers. I brought them in and I got them to help me with the implementation. So I didn't build anything out in a silo. I got the input from sales, because if they have a say in how things are done and they are a part of that journey with you, they're far more likely to adopt it. And when they started to see how easy it was to use, it was fairly easy to get them to adopt it. We've actually, I will say, the adoption has been so good that we've actually taken all of our other documents down off of a SharePoint. Nobody can get to them. You have to go through the system to get them, which was a big thing for us to be able to do, to actually direct them to a one-stop shop.
And we did announce it beforehand, and that this was coming, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. The actual sales influencers, it was interesting. We were anticipating that from Teams, they'd like to press the Summize assistant and create the documents. But it turned out, for whatever reason, the sales influencer said, no, actually, we'll just do it from the web-based creation from there. And so it didn't matter to us, but it was an interesting that there were multiple ways in which we could have done it, and we got engagement from and buy-in from the sales influencers.
Yeah, I think that's a great approach, particularly involving key stakeholders so early, those sales influencers that you've identified, and bringing them on that CLM journey with you. As you mentioned, it makes it feel as though everyone's going the right path together, and obviously they can see the benefits early on and the impact that obviously the software is going to have on their day-to-day as well, which naturally garners that excitement.
One more question from Margaret. How many contracts would you estimate that you manage a month? One of the biggest obstacles we face is that we are a medium-sized company and don't have thousands of contracts to manage.
Yeah, I think we don't either. We would have under 1,000 contracts to manage, maybe even 500 or 600. And I think this is great for us, but I can see the scalability that if in the future we get bigger, and you never know, M&A world, what's happening. So if we get bigger, then I can see it's scalable as well. And if you get a request in, it'll always come to the head legal person, but then the head legal person can assign it to another legal person. So it comes in, if you like, and you can reassign. I think it's obviously, and we also it's worldwide. Ikon is a worldwide company with 3 distinct regions, and we find it works well for that as well.
Yeah, I would add on to that. We only have about 20 sales reps, and our average number of orders that we will get in a quarter is somewhere around 30 to 40. So it's not, we're a small to medium business. So we're, and this is a great application for us because it's not super heavy lifting. It's not overkill. I've seen some CLMs and worked with some CLMs in the past that are crazy when it comes to the implementation, and they become very unmanageable, whereas this is basically you turn it on and there's a few configurations that you make and it works, and it's great for small to medium business because it's affordable as well.
Yeah, and it's not intrusive. It's not like a CLM that requires you to be their own application.
Yeah.
It works. You look at it in your browser, and essentially it looks seamless to the rest of your organization.
And I think it's really that seamlessness, again, going back to that adoption point, it's that really that obviously helps get everyone using it, because obviously there's no point bringing on CLM software or getting software really in any space on board if ultimately the main people it's there to help aren't going to use it. So yeah, that's great context. Thanks, Garrick.
Our hot chat. One more question. We have somebody who is really interested in discussing the pre-implementation stage. What should be done before the go live, or what should we expect to do before go live? And we have people in the chat who are helping out and saying they need to map out the current needs and so on. I would love to hear from Garrick and Leah talk about pre-implementation, what you did to get your CLM in order before you implemented Summize.
Yeah, it was identifying the contracts we wanted to automate and what the fields were in that, or the clauses in particular, and my alternates and so forth. So identify and mapping those out so that then when the template was created, it was easy to be created. If you just go, oh, we don't know which contracts we want. No, you should identify your top 10, or you may not even have 10, but identify your top 10. What are the variables in it? What else do you want to lock down when it's created? And what options that you have. I think also you can look at the way in which you implement. Do you have a particular application? Do you have Salesforce and you want to integrate it with that? Plan ahead how you want it to integrate. Do you want to be able to create from Teams or work from the web base? What else would you say, Leah?
Yeah, I would say don't boil the ocean, right? Don't try to do too much all at once. Start small. Start with the things that you know are already working fairly well, and then just enhance those things. We started with our master licensing agreement. We started there. We started with that. We started with our NDA, and then after that, we started layering in more things around our academic license agreements, consultancy agreements, services agreements, but we initially just did it with a few handful to make sure that everybody was adopting it, that it was working as intended. And then we can slowly enhance that as we go. And I'm still adding contracts today to make it so that it's more streamlined for things that weren't necessarily critical when we first started this journey, but yet Summize is a great tool for them.
And identify someone great like Leah who can learn it, that actually looks at and learns how the templates are done. You don't want to have to go back to Summize. Summize are very good about teaching, and it's not a hard thing how to do a template once you've gone through it a few times. Identify a good person that will implement it like Leah, who did a great job.
And those templates that you decided to bring on board first, those contracts you identified, what was the selection process and the thinking behind that? How did you decide on that? Obviously, as two departments working together.
I think it was the highest and the most important one, being a master license agreement. And I think the confidentiality agreement was another one, because that usually predates any engagement. And they were the two priority ones. And if you looked, when we looked at, say, the spreadsheet we used to use, what were the things that we typically put on the spreadsheet?
Yeah, definitely.
And those.
And then almost working into that process mapping as well, because obviously you had the manual processes with spreadsheets and also the back and forth, obviously, with the sales team and legal. And did you also have approval processes that you needed to map into the Summize process? Or
no, we haven't yet done that. We're a fairly flat organization, so we haven't had to do that. The only approver would probably be the signatory, and then therefore
they're signing it.
But I know you can do it, and if it ever came to that stage, as we get bigger, then I think we would put it in. If you needed buy-in from the actual product or service team to say they agreed with the commercials prior to a signatory, then yeah, we would put that in.
Yeah, and we're actually in the early stages of adopting a deal desk, because I'm in charge of order management as well. And we've seen a need for deal desks so that we can get proper review of the commercials by the right people within the organization. And it's one of the applications that we're looking at, if that's the right tool for us to manage those approvals, because we can manage them in Salesforce or we can manage them in Summize. So it just depends on our user base. And we haven't really gotten far enough along in that deal desk journey, but it is part of our future roadmap to get something in line around the approval process.
Yeah, that's a really exciting project to be working on. I think obviously going back to that question that Shai called out about the pre-implementation work you have to do, I think what we see a lot of customers doing is obviously considering their current processes and workflows and understand that they may not be perfect or ideal or the end stage for what they want, and then almost picking that apart and working with the implementation teams to then overlay the software with it and understand what's your new almost Summize process and how do you replicate the same inflection points throughout that.
Yeah, one last thing on that, on the pre-implementation. I think it's very important that you have somebody who's very process driven, both on the business side as well as on the legal side, because you need to bridge the two sides of the business. You need to build a bridge between those, and you have to make sure that whatever is going to happen with the sales process works with the legal process, and that they complement each other, and there's no detractors in there, because that is the first thing that sales will point out on you. It's just the name of the game when you work with salespeople.
Yeah, that's great advice. And then looking, obviously, I know we've spoken a lot about the pre-signature, almost commercial side of working with contracts, but then for that repository as well, was there any work that you had to do ahead of bringing your signed contracts on board to CLM?
So we that's a work in progress. Our repositories were a complete mess, if I'm being honest. We have stuff stored in Summize, we have stuff stored in Salesforce, we have stuff stored in Jira, we've got stuff on SharePoint. So going through all of those contracts historically and trying to get them into the repository, that's an ongoing effort that we just continue to work on. As deals come in, we review, we see if there's any legal documents missing from Summize, and we go ahead and we put them in. Our goal is to have Summize be the one-stop shop where anybody that has access to it can go in and look at contracts, including sales, because it's not easy if you're storing things in Salesforce. Those of you that have that as a CRM, it's not easy to figure out where those files are located. They might be on the account, they might be on the opportunity, they might be on a contact, they might be on a lead, they could be anywhere, right? And so having this one place that you can go to where not only is it's a one-stop shop, but it's also organized. You have folders, you have subfolders that allow, plus you have different types of contract types. So I know if I'm looking for a master license agreement and I'm looking through the historical, I don't have to go dig and dig and dig. I can just filter master license agreement for this customer. And then I can see the things that are classified that way, which helps order management tremendously, because we often, especially since I'm also in charge of the renewal process, we often have to revisit contracts to make sure that we're compliant with them when we go through the renewal. Having something like this has been critical, and it's also sped up our processes.
Thanks, Leah. Quick question for me. Are you looking at using Summize as well for that renewals process and managing obviously dates coming up, things like that? Or is that something that you're going to work on?
We've not even thought about that. It's probably something that Garrick and I should talk about, because we have different types of renewals, right? We have the stuff that's evergreen, but then we also have things where the contract actually expires and you need sales to engage with the client, right? And being able to be proactive on that and get in front of that, it's definitely something that we should look into.
We have another great question from Genevieve. She says, we have a mix of agreements, not just sales, independent contractor, talent, services, NDAs. Anything to keep in mind for knowing if a CLM can accommodate a variety of different agreement types?
It can accommodate multiple different types of agreement types. It also has security wrapped around it. For instance, Garrick and I are both administrators as well as our CFO, but everybody else I've locked down the security, right? The sales can only see sales stuff. Anything that's related to HR, I've got a bunch of HR stuff in there as well, employment agreements, salary information, things like that. I've got that locked down. So the only people that can see that are the people that work in HR. Your administrators will be able to see everything. So you might want to take that into consideration before you assign an administrator. But for the most part, we haven't had any issues with that, because I have a corporate folder, a finance folder, one for HR, and then I have a sales folder that's organized basically alphabetically and by contract type.
And when you save the contract into Summize, you tell it what type of contract it is. This is a master license agreement. This is a HR agreement. So it properly categorizes it and puts those security protocols on it.
Yeah. In terms of, I know obviously we're speaking a little bit more about the repository and executed agreements. Have either of you used the summary features in Summize and those reports that we generate?
Yes. Recently had to do just to have a look at several clauses all at once, for it just to pull it out. You don't have to skim through the document, skim through it, and it'll pull out the clause summary, and it can be quite useful.
Yeah. Were you mentioning, Garrett, that you'd used that recently for a bit of a project, or have I?
Yeah, and I can't say any more about that.
Don't worry, I won't press you on it. I think, as you've mentioned, though, it's really useful once you have those contracts identified by what the contract type is. Again, some of that work that you can do almost on the pre-implementation stage is review your templates, review your contracts, and think, okay, out of these documents, what's actually important to us as a business? Because I know certainly, obviously, Garrett, you're testing this, you're looking for very different bits of information out of an NDA or a DPA than you are your actual order forms that obviously your commercial team will mainly work with. So putting in that legwork earlier on to obviously understand your templates, consider what you might need to report on. And then again, when you upload them, getting it automatically extracted, that's quite a big consideration to do pre-implementation.
And it's a good opportunity to cull. You can look, we've got 3 sort of types. Do we need these 3 types? Can Summize in the creation tab actually get over that by asking a question, and it can insert a particular clause that only one of them has, and that's why we've got the separate. It helps you with efficiency.
Yeah,
that
and streamlining.
Is a really good point. Yeah, that is a really good point, because we had a lot of times we had things that were regional based, because there's different language based on the region, and because of the way that Summize works, I just have it set up so once they select the region, it automatically updates and inserts the clauses for that region so that Garrick doesn't have to worry about it, the user doesn't have to worry about it. So instead of having what used to be 4 different documents, we have one document that takes all of the different considerations into play, which is really nice, especially from an administrative perspective.
And so I just saw there is an OCR function. Someone just asked, so it is, and it can read the contracts and tell you.
The AI is good.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of hesitancy, particularly obviously in the legal space. I've encountered it myself when it comes to using AI and almost the capabilities of it. What are your sort of experiences in using that within a CLM, would you say?
Oh, look, I think if you're extracting, that's what AI is very good at. It can read it quicker than a human. It can get various clauses out and give you keywords that you're looking for. So I would say on a day-to-day basis, it's fine to use on that. I wouldn't use it for any advice yet. I don't think AI does that. Any AI does that well that I've seen yet, to actually give you advice on would this trigger on this basis. I don't think they're at that stage yet, but they're very good in just automation and reviewing and giving you the information and summarizing it.
Leah, have you also been able to use it from almost that sales perspective as well?
Yes, it's very helpful, especially again from the order management / renewal side of the house, right? It's easy for us to go use that AI, like Garrick said, to pull specific clauses out. Like if I'm looking for a termination clause, or I'm looking for something related to, how many days, what their payment terms or something like that, I can easily go and just filter to that, and it'll pull up all of the contracts that have something like that in it for me. And I can go through and look and see what's standard, what's not standard. So it's helped from that aspect. So yeah, I would say definitely. It's from a learning model perspective. It's not like it's looping out and going and bringing back, like some AI models really are learning about this is more a read function that helps make, so you don't have to have a paralegal go through pages and pages of a document, highlight for you what sections you want and bring them back. It plays that type of role of what I would consider like your intern or your lower end people that would go through a contract. It eliminates the need for that person.
And to give you a practical example, actually, recently we put a lot of contracts in Summize, and suddenly there was a red flag in Summize. And so I looked at the red flag, and it was actually detected that one of the payment terms in one of those contracts wasn't in accordance with our rules. It was a very small contract. We hadn't, I think, even known it. It was an older contract. But it was just good, just by putting it in there. Summize had a look and said, hey, there's a problem here.
Yeah, that's a really useful example. As you say as well, the more you then build out what your company standards are and what you should and shouldn't be accepting, then again, from a risk management perspective, I think that's where that AI functionality can really come into play.
Yeah.
I'm keen now to also understand a little bit about, once you'd obviously almost selected a vendor, you were ready to go ahead with a CLM. Did you need to build a bit of a business case to maybe management and say, look, this is why we need CLM? Because sometimes that's something that a lot of teams struggle with once they identify the need themselves.
I think ours was fairly obvious at the stage we were at.
Yeah.
Everyone using Excel spreadsheet, four lawyers, 4 years, contracts everywhere. And so I think ours was fairly obvious. But I would think generally that the advantages you get from a good CLM that isn't necessarily that expensive, we're not talking Salesforce prices, is probably an easier thing to do. And you're saying it's not a new extra big program. Everyone's going to have a big icon and they have to go through a training on it that's extensive and particular commands they have to use. It's something that's fairly intuitive to use. And I think if you show that to your stakeholders and you show the benefits of seeing the dashboard, of the contract reviews, the creation, I think it becomes a much easier sell.
I also think that from a use case perspective of what it can do from ROI is pretty big, because it can eliminate some of the staff that you may have, especially your more administrative staff. It can potentially streamline the processes in a way that speeds up. So maybe you don't need as many legal counsel to review as well. So there's big business payback on that aspect of it. And also, I think it frees up your salespeople to move faster as well, which means they have more time to be able to focus on what they're selling versus buried in administration, which is always a big problem when you're a salesperson, is getting bogged down with administrative tasks. And not to mention that we were able to enable the entire sales team in 2 30-minute sessions. And the only reason there were 2 separate ones was because of time zone differences. Being able to get it trained and get user adoption in a 30-minute session is pretty unheard of if you've ever worked with any application, and especially if you worked with sales and applications. That's one thing I didn't mention, Tom, is that the implementation journey with Summize is very hands-on. They are there to help you all the way through the process, and they don't turn you loose until you say, yeah, we're ready to be on our own. And then they have a great team of people at their customer success that are there for anything that you need, and they're very fast to respond. Like use case that Derek and I have been talking about that just happened yesterday. I reached out to my customer success person. She got back to me within 5-10 minutes, right? And I had the answer so that I could go and continue to work on what I needed to do to get Garrick what he needed. The implementation is just so easy. You can't get a better return on your investment. I can't say that enough.
And the time, one thing, if you're dealing with different time zones, request for an NDA, and then perhaps your legal is 3 hours ahead of you or behind, and you're waiting 3 hours for it rather than just pressing a button and creating it yourself.
Yeah, you really can't underestimate that. Almost the self-serve use case. I think that's something that we really work with our customers a lot on to enable them to do, and it really does work wonders and increase those turnaround times. I think for me, one of the big takeaways from today is a lot of people go out looking for a CLM, particularly focused on the legal benefits, which I know, as Garrick, we've mentioned today, there's obviously a lot of them, but it's almost that sales enablement piece that I'm taking away from looking at turning around those deals quicker, better transparency into actual contracts and where they're up to themselves. I think that it seems, at least for Ikon, that's been probably the main benefit, would you say?
Yeah,
definitely. Go ahead, Garrick.
Yeah, sorry. You've got the transparency for legal. You've got the peace of mind that when they're generating a document, they're generating the right one. They've not gone to an old template on their computer. And Leah, as Leah will probably point out now, it really speeds things up for sales and enables them.
Perfect.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I don't have that, like before they would reach out to me or reach out to one of the sales ops coordinators and they'd be like, where do I find this document? I don't know how do I fill this out? Or they would want us to fill it out for them. And now none of that happens anymore. It's completely gone. And by the time we get into the order management cycle, far down the line, after everything's already been signed, we don't have a lot of the issues that we had before because we have a process where we know things are being reviewed by the right people at the right time throughout the entire sales process. And for sales, I would say it's really been game changing because it speeds everything up. Very rarely do I hear Garrick hasn't gotten back to me. And for the longest time before we implemented this a year ago, that was like every week I heard it 2 or 3 times. And now it's almost non-existent.
That's amazing to hear. I think that's a great narrative. Obviously, seeing that shift in obviously opinions and relationships as well, working together. I think that's almost as important as the end business results as well. Thank you for providing so much context on that implementation process, how you went through choosing a vendor, then also obviously those key features and the training sessions as well that we've identified too. I know we're coming up on just roughly 10 minutes left in the session, so I'm going to open the floor up to a few more questions from our audience. So now is your time to really fill the chat with any questions you may have, obviously for Garrick and Leah, but equally for me and Shai too.
Yeah. So we've done a great job of answering the questions as they've come up. I'm looking to see if we missed anyone. So I'm just going to scroll through the chat. Can you talk about, was there one particular thing that made you choose Summize over others?
What would be the less intrusive way that it is? So it's not a separate application, and it's not you have to load this up, and how it integrates with your browser and Word and so forth. I think that was good. And then I think also the pricing. We're a small to medium company, so we can't afford huge expenses like huge Salesforce one. We have Salesforce. They've become so big that they're quite expensive, as people on this call probably know.
Yeah, it's just the ease of implementation. If you've ever done some of these applications, when you talk about accounting applications, you talk about CRMs, you talk about marketing applications, you talk about any of those type of applications, the implementation for that takes months. And when I say months, it can take months to a year, and then you're still working on tuning it to get it right. And it's somebody's full-time job. If not one person, maybe multiple people. This is not that. It's not. It's that I may have to go out and tweak something maybe once a month, maybe once a quarter, but it just works, and it's just made our lives a lot easier.
And if you had to compare implementation on a scale, I would put Summize at one end and SAP on the other. Having been involved with a few SAP implementations, sorry to anyone from SAP on the call, but that's how I would differentiate the scale.
Yeah.
That's great to hear. In terms of as well, I think just to round things off, it'd be great, Leah and Garrick, maybe obviously with the benefit of going through this implementation now, and if there was any advice that you'd maybe give obviously the attendees, or perhaps Leah and Garrick a few months ago before you went on this journey, is there anything that sort of stands out to you?
From the sales side, I think it's making sure that you socialize it with the sales team early so they know that it's coming. I think it's getting their input and almost having them provide you with how they want it to work. Don't try to like shove it down their throat and say, this is how it needs to work because this is what our processes are. Let sales tell you what they want the process to be. You can tweak it, but I think that is probably the biggest thing on the sales side of the house, is to get that buy-in, because once you have the user adoption, everything is fairly seamless from there. And it's been a huge time saver.
Amazing. Thank you, Leah. Garrick, did you have anything else you want to add on?
Yeah, I would say it's what we discussed in the pre-implementation. It's just identifying those contracts and what I said, start small, get your most important, say 2 or 3, and just start with those even, and then see how they work.
So a bit of work up front ends up paying dividends further down the line.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Amazing.
Awesome.
Shai, I'm not sure if any other questions have popped into the chat.
No other questions. I think we'll wrap up here. This was a wonderful hour or so of CLM, and I really appreciate everybody in the chat chiming in with some great questions and some great back and forth. So that was wonderful. If you're interested, folks, in learning more about Summize, you can let us know on our poll. You can also just reach out to them directly, summize.com, easy enough, but you could also let us know in the poll and we'll connect you. We'll wrap up here. Thank you so much, Garrick, Leah, and Tom, for a wonderful program. I guess, Tom, any last words before we sign off?
Just to reiterate your thanks, really, Shai, Garrick, Leah, obviously it's been great working with you from a Summize perspective, but thank you for obviously being so open and available during this conversation to give us your insights really into bringing on board a CLM. And I think, again, we can see that the benefits are not only just from a legal perspective, but equally, that sales cycle efficiency and solving problems across the business, really. So thank you for that.
And perhaps we should point out, we are getting nothing from doing this. Yeah. So we're not saying all our positives about using Summize because we're getting some benefit from you. We're saying because we actually believe it.
100%. 100%. Yep.
I'll send you both a box of beers in the post. Cheers all.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Cheers. Have a wonderful Thursday and a great weekend. I hope to see everybody back next week for more In-House Connect.